Coastal Stories. Okay, there we go. Continue. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today on our Coastal Stories grant program. We're excited that you all are here with us today. We're excited to bring this Coastal Stories grant program to you. All these beautiful faces that you see on this screen is the team that has been working really hard over the past year to bring this program to life. And I'll just take a few minutes to introduce us all. My name is Emily Lopez, and I'm a project manager with the South Coast team. Shalini Khanna will be co-presenting this webinar with me, and she is a project manager with the Bay Area. Erica Johnson is a project manager with the Bay Area as well. Fanny Yang is a project manager with our North Coast. Both Erica and Fanny Yang will be joining us at the end of this webinar presentation to help facilitate the Q&A portion of this webinar. And I also want to introduce our interim executive officer, Mary Smalls. She has been guiding us through putting on this grant program, and she will be here to help us answer any larger questions that they do come up. And then Jennifer Fields is our Sea Grant Fellow, who is our tech guru. So after this, she will be going over a few Zoom tech overview, and then we'll be doing a little bit of Jamboard networking so we can get to know each other and see who is on this webinar. And then after that, we'll dive into the presentation and go over what this Coastal Stories grant program is all about. And then we'll dive into the pre-proposal, which is the first step in applying to the grant program. And at the end, we'll hold about 30 minutes for a Q&A. And with that said, I'm going to pass it on to Jen.
Thanks, Emily. So just to go over some webinar logistics in Zoom, we're going to be using the chat function to share links that we talk about during the presentation. And then if you can use the Q&A function for any of your questions during the presentation, like Emily said, Fanny and Erica will be facilitating that Q&A. So use that Q&A function, the bottom right middle of your screen for that part of our presentation. And there's also closed captioning available as well. You just have to enable it. It should be on the bottom of your screen as well. And next slide, Emily. Thank you. We are also going to be utilizing a Jamboard. So if you're looking for a project partner, please write down your name, organization, contact info, and a few words of your project interest. And anyone that writes on this board is consenting for us to share this in the follow-up email that we'll send to you. So I'm going to share this in the chat right now, and you can go to it. And if you haven't used Jamboard before, you can add either a sticky note or a text box to add your text on the left-hand side and use the arrow to move the text to the category that you most identify with. If you could do us a favor, and please do not click the clear frame because that clears everything on the board. And then if more space is needed, since there are a lot of folks on this call, you can click on the top left arrow, the top right arrow on the top of the screen to go to more pages. And with that, I will kick it back to Emily.
So we're gonna take about maybe 3 minutes for people to take their time to fill in so you don't miss any of the info.
Okay, so it does say that too many people are viewing the thing, so some people aren't able to get on. So This will be shared again in the follow-up. So if you aren't able to go on now, but want to add your name, you can feel free to do that in the follow-up after as well.
So we try to do some networking on Zoom. We know we all miss networking. We haven't been able to do that in person in a long time, but yeah, feel free to network after this webinar because partnership is needed for this Coastal Grant Story program. Okay. So for those who are new with us, I do want to give a brief overview. We are the State Coastal Conservancy. We're a state agency that protects, restores, and provides access to the California coast. We work entirely along the California coast and up coastal watersheds. And you can see in this map, the highlighted green area is our jurisdiction, which is about 1/3 of the California's land area. And it's a really important area because it contains about 75% of California's population. Okay. So a little info about how this Coastal Stories Grant Program came about. We have an internal Justice, Equity, and Diversity and Inclusion Committee at the State Coastal Conservancy. And as we were brainstorming tangible ways we could make the outdoors more inclusive along the coast, we came across an Atlantic article from 2018 that gave 5 ways, that talked about 5 ways to make the outdoors more inclusive. And one of the recommendations was to teach the full history of the outdoors. As we all have seen, a lot of the outdoor stories in America are from European settlers' perspectives and their historic interpretation. And as a public grant funding agency, we would like to broaden these stories within our jurisdiction to help amplify and diversify those stories. And with that, we have allocated $1 million for this grant program, and we're very excited to see the stories you want to bring to life. So this Coastal Stories program, we seek to fund projects that plan, develop, or implement storytelling, installation, or materials that represent communities and voices that may include but are not limited to Black, Indigenous, people of color, people with disabilities, immigrant communities, low-income communities, and other historically excluded communities. The story installations can include murals, signage, monuments, guides, or more. Feel free to get creative with how you tell your stories. You are the storyteller, so we'll leave that up to you. But they must stay within this realm of our project goals. So with the projects, all projects should meet at least one of these program priorities, and that is to promote a sense of belonging in the outdoor spaces by presenting perspectives that include Black, Indigenous, people of color, or other historic communities. Number 2, you should engage representatives from historic excluded communities to develop and share their coastal perspectives. And number 3 would be to improve educational content in California outdoor spaces by correcting one-sided histories and retelling stories in a more appropriate and inclusive ways. And this would be developing new content that shares untold stories. Number 4 would be to use creative form of interpretation and storytelling. And now I'm going to pass it on to Shalini.
Hi, everyone. So now I'll go over the eligibility requirements for this grant program. Applicants must either be a federally recognized tribe, a 501c3 nonprofit, or a public agency. Other community-based orgs and tribes that are not federally recognized can still apply, but will need to work with a partner that meets this requirement or through a 501c3 fiscal sponsor. Next slide, please. As for what projects qualify, essentially, we're looking to fund projects that present storytelling content in a way that's connected to publicly accessible outdoor spaces within our jurisdiction. Emily already went over our agency's jurisdiction, and you can also see that map included in the RFP. Emily also discussed the Coastal Stories program priorities, and I want to reiterate that all projects need to meet at least one of these priorities. We'll fund planning and preparation activities such as hiring historians, storytellers, and artists, conducting community engagement, designing materials, and acquiring permits and permissions. We'll also fund implementation activities such as installation or creation of the project. One slide back, please. Here are some examples of eligible projects. The first bullet includes the range of storytelling products that our team could think of funding, including development and implementation of signage, monuments, murals, visual art installations, audio tours, maps, guides, and content linked to QR codes on signage. We're not the experts here in storytelling, though, and we're open and excited to hear from projects that use other creative types of storytelling that we haven't thought of. Another example of what you can use these funds for is hiring historians, artists, and community members to research, write content, and develop storytelling products with this content. We want to hear stories from the people they represent, so budgeting some of your grant funds to pay for storytellers and community members is highly encouraged. Please note that any content development that we're funding should be connected to a real-world product or should otherwise reach a public audience. Projects can include new installations or additions to existing public access and education features that correct or enhance the existing storytelling. Next slide. Here's some examples of projects that would be ineligible for Coastal Stories funding. Like I mentioned, content development that isn't tied to real-world installations or that doesn't have a way to reach its intended audience won't be eligible. In the same vein, campaigns or content that are primarily designed for social media are not eligible. Our agency has a goal of protecting, restoring, and providing access to the California coast. So if you're interested in other types of projects that aren't so much related to storytelling, you can see our other programs on the Conservancy website, or you can contact us directly to find a program that might be a better fit. So now on to partnerships. We're highly encouraging partnerships between landowners and community storytellers for this grant program. While CBOs, historians, and other types of storytellers will be best able to share the underrepresented stories of California, landowners will be most able to navigate the logistics of implementation, permitting, and maintenance. So if you are a landowner, we encourage you to partner with a CBO, or at least know your intended audience and community and elevate stories that are relevant. If you are a community storyteller, we encourage you to partner with a landowner for implementation and maintenance. As Jen introduced earlier in this webinar, we have a Jamboard going where you can add your contact info if you're looking to network for these partnerships. We at the Conservancy are also happy to help build these partnerships. If you need help finding the appropriate partner, please reach out. And I think Jen just reposted the link for the Jamboard, so feel free to click on it now. Emily, you're muted.
Sorry. I'll go over the maintenance portion of this grant. I do want to say that these funds are public tax dollars, so we always aim to maximize the life of the funds. For this reason, applicants should have a plan for maintenance for their project and should include a reasonable lifespan. For newer creative projects, Conservancy staff can assist with determining an appropriate maintenance plan. One example of a typical maintenance plan, so if your project contains signage, it should stay in place for at least 10 years and think about weathering and other sorts of issues that may pertain to the location that you're placing your signage at. So I'm going to go over the selection criteria, and bear with me because it's a long list. I do want to say that the selection criteria is fully fleshed out in our RFP. So you can there's more info there if you want to look there, but I'll go over a brief few points. I think I went over. Sorry, there we go. So as we went over, all projects should meet at least one point of our Coastal Stories program, our Coastal Stories program priorities. Our projects should promote and have more inclusive experience for the outdoors for all Californians, and it can recognize the difference in cultural and social backgrounds, physical capabilities, history, and more. Projects should demonstrate a meaningful outreach and community engagement in developing the story. The project should demonstrate that it will reach its intended audience. The project should use creative form of storytelling. So applicants should demonstrate their overall capability of carrying out the proposed project and including having the necessary partnerships. Projects should demonstrate an appropriate maintenance plan, and projects should demonstrate a site feasibility, meaning that it should have an appropriate location and a plan for how they're going to implement their story at the specific location. And if applicable, you should address CEQA and how you will comply with it. And if you need help with meeting with any of this selection criteria, feel free to reach out to our team and we're happy to help. Applying for this program consists of a pre-proposal followed by a full proposal invitation. The pre-proposal, which is included in the RFP document, is due by 5 p.m. on January 31st for the first batch of review. After this deadline, applications will be accepted and will be reviewed after the first batch for as long as funds remain. However, projects who submit by the grant deadline will hold priority. We will respond to pre-proposal submissions within 60 days. At this point, we will either invite you to submit a full proposal, provide comments, and ask you to resubmit your pre-proposal. Or if we make a decision that your project is not competitive, we will let you know within the 60 days. If you are invited to submit a full proposal, we will provide the proposal form with instructions. You can submit the full proposal whenever you complete it, and can reach out to our Conservancy staff if you need help clarifying any of the questions. You'll need to have full proof of support from a landowner at this point. Once we receive your full proposal, we'll get back to you within 60 days on a decision and let you know if we need more time to review. At this point, if you received an authorization for your application, we will take it to the Conservancy board at a public meeting, and these happen approximately 5 times throughout the year. After the board approves the project, we will write up a grant agreement that must be signed between the grantee and us, and we will take about 6 weeks to do this. And then projects are expected to begin mid to late 2022 and early 2023.
As Emily mentioned, the first step in applying is completing your pre-proposal, which is attached to the RFP. Your pre-proposal will determine whether you get invited to submit a full proposal. So though it's really pretty simple and short, you'll want to make sure you're representing your project well in this step. We encourage you to reach out to us to consult about your project prior to submission, especially if you're a new applicant. That way we can provide any initial feedback that may guide you in forming your application. The screenshot here is of the cover sheet for the pre-proposal, which may look familiar if you've applied to other Conservancy grants. The information we request here is pretty straightforward. In the top box for contact information, write in the information of the org that is the primary applicant, who would be receiving and managing the funds if selected for a grant. This means that if you're working with a fiscal sponsor, This box should include their information. If you're a 501c3, please include your IRS letter as an attachment to this proposal as well. The second box is for project info, and here you'll put the project name, the amount of Conservancy funds you're requesting for the project, as well as the total cost of the project. Also write in an approximate start and end date. Projects are expected to begin mid to late 2022 or early 2023. And all projects should be completed by February 2026 when the funds will run out. In the last box called location info, write down the county or counties that your project will take place in. And in the specific location box, you can give us the latitude and longitude or any other additional information that that tells us more about the specific location. Throughout the pre-proposal, you'll see that we have a suggested number of sentences and paragraphs that you should aim to answer each question in. We're not going to go over the entire pre-proposal right now, but if you read along with the instructions carefully and try to follow them, you should be okay. You can also reach out to us with more questions. And though we've provided a number of sentences and paragraphs to use, there is some leeway in our suggested lengths. So if having that one extra sentence really makes a difference for you, go ahead and include it. For now, I'm just going to go over a few of the more complex sections. In the project description and location section, you'll briefly describe your proposed project. You should explain the project's goals and expected outcomes, including what story you would like to tell, what storytelling products will be created, and who the target audience is. Be specific about the portion of the project that would be funded by the Conservancy. If it helps you to better explain your project to us, you can also share additional materials as links and attachments. This is totally optional, but if you have already created any handouts or short videos on the project, these may be submitted to supplement your project description. For the location, describe the project site, and if there's signage or installations of another kind, share where they will be. You'll need to include a map of the project location. And you can also include photos or graphics, but again, those are optional. So the only required attachment for the project description is some kind of map. In the pre-proposal phase, we don't have a set format for how you complete the budget and schedule, so you can use whatever format you prefer, but just make sure you provide all the information that we request in the instructions for these sections. If you'd prefer to have some type of template to work with, please contact us and we can provide some. For the project schedule, provide us a schedule that lists all the major project tasks and milestones and estimates their completion dates. For the project budget, include the estimated total cost of the project, which activities you're requesting Conservancy funding for, and the proposed sources of additional funding that you may need. Be sure to include proposed funding sources even if you haven't yet secured them. Just make sure to let us know what the status of these funds are. Let's say you've applied for another grant. Just say that you've applied but aren't sure yet of whether you received it. At the end of the pre-proposal, you'll see this checklist. And you can use this when you're preparing your final submission to make sure you don't forget anything. And the required elements here are numbers 1 and 3. And these include the pre-proposal document, which should be around 3 pages or less, and a project location map and our photos. Numbers 2 and 4 are optional and include any additional media, plans, or images that you have that would help convey your project to our review committee. So depending on the phase of the project that you're in, you may or may not have additional materials ready. You don't need to make them for us, but if you do have them and it would support your application, feel free to submit them. Once your pre-proposal is all ready, you'll submit it to grants@scc.ca.gov by January 31st, 2022, if you want to be considered in the priority batch of applications. Please note that there's 2 emails listed on this slide, and though you'll submit pre-proposals and proposals to grants@scc.gov, for all other questions, for requesting project consultations, please use the coastalstories@scc.ca.gov email. And we want to remind and invite you to reach out to us if you want to discuss your project, want support in building partnerships, or have any other questions as you prepare your proposals. We especially encourage new applicants to reach out to us. We really want to see these stories told on the coast, and we'll do what we can to support applicants and grantees that are making this happen. So that is the overview of the Coastal Stories Grant Program for you all. And we want to thank you for being here and for your interest in this new and exciting program. And now we'll open up the floor for questions, and Fanny and Erica will be fielding the Q&A, so please feel free to keep adding questions there. And we have about 34 minutes for questions, and we'll answer as many as we can. And if we don't get to all of them, we'll do our best to follow up in an email with the remaining answers. And some answers will also just be answered in text by Fanny and Erica in the Q&A section. So Fanny and Erica, feel free to let us know what the questions are.
Okay, can you all hear me? Good. Okay, first question is, will the application be offered in Spanish? And I can help field this one actually, unless others, okay. So we don't currently have a Spanish translation for the application, but our team can reconvene and see if we can get access to a translation service and send an email out and update you all.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, it's completely frozen on my end, so I'm working blinded. But our next question is sort of a clarification question. Like, can you clarify again what landowner means? I think you mentioned private public landowner versus like natural cultural resources land manager. So can you just clarify those terms?
Yeah, what we mean by landowner is just whether it's private or public, whoever manages and maintains lands and has the authority to implement projects on the lands. So it could be any of the above, public, private, or natural resource managers too.
Great. Next question is, are proposal reviewers representatives of BIPOC communities?
Go for it, Erica.
Okay. That I can try fielding this question and, add on if you have anything to add. So proposal reviewers will be the project staff that are on this call, our regional managers, and another project staff representing that region. So although the staff you see on this call are representatives of BIPOC communities, we are not community representatives. I don't know if that makes sense. In this early process or for this grant program, I think we pulled it together and it is still a little bit of a pilot. And so we don't have maybe like a community board established per se. To review the applications this time. But I think that is a great suggestion and something that we should revisit if we are able to do another round.
And next question is about the program. So is this an annual program or is it a one-time opportunity?
For now, this is a one-time opportunity. If we don't spend the whole 1 million, we might have another grant round next year. And depending on how the program goes and what kinds of funds are available to the Conservancy in future years, we may redo this program. But like Erica said, at this point, it's a bit of a pilot that we're excited about and see a lot of potential for.
Sorry, having a little bit of a technical difficulty. I think Fanny, maybe if you can keep reading the questions, I'm gonna go look for new questions because everything's frozen on your end. Is
Yeah.
that good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, so the next question is, if we are a current grantee of a coastal commission grant or coastal conservancy grant, will this impact our eligibility for the storytelling grant? And the answer is no, it will not. You're welcome to apply even if you are already a grantee. And the next question is, are matching funds needed?
No matching funds are required.
So just a clarification question again. So someone asked, is the requested amount for their project and the total project cost, does it necessarily have to be the same number or a different number?
It can be, so it depends on your project. If you're taking multiple sources of funding into account, our grant just being one of them, then your total will be larger than what you're requesting. But if you're asking for the Conservancy to fund the entire project, then your Conservancy fund request will be the same as your total funding required for the project.
Great. Another budget/cost question. Are there certain costs that are eligible or ineligible in relation to grant funds? So this person, or the person who asked the question, is saying they're a local history museum and would like to create new permanent exhibits with the funds, or things like exhibition equipment like gallery walls, vitrines eligible, and what about addition of staff on the project?
For me, I think that's a really good question. For me, my only concern with the history museum my question would be, is the museum free and accessible for everyone, or would it be a cost to enter? I would suggest this person to reach out to us so we can work this out before you submit your pre-proposal.
Can you give us an idea of what the monetary awards are? I'm assuming this is and asking, like, what is the typical or average amount of the awards if you were to be selected as a grantee?
We don't have an exact amount since we aren't sure exactly what we're going to get in the way of requests, but I think we are imagining less than $200,000 per ask, though if the project is compelling and has a wide reach, that's not a hard limit either. So we're expecting a range of asks.
All right, so I'm gonna pull some questions that are more around the programming and applicants themselves. So are storytellers allowed to apply without a 501c3 organization?
You are allowed, you can apply, but we encourage you to find a fiscal sponsor because a 501c3 status is a requirement.
And if you have a project and want to consult with us to find a 501c3 to work with, again, reach out to us.
Mm-hmm. And just, can you clarify again the landowner partnership part of the program? Are these public land managers, private landowners? Can you just kind of clarify that again?
Yeah, so they can be private or public, but just whoever manages and maintains lands that are publicly accessible. So lands that like anybody here could go visit. That's what we mean by landowner. And the partnerships we're encouraging are between landowners and community storytellers.
Are there any specific types of stories that should be told? And does the focus of the artwork or project need to have an environmental component?
There does not need to be an environmental component. And there is a range of stories that could be told, but we would like to see them represent communities that have been historically excluded from open spaces. So that could be BIPOC communities, immigrant communities, disabled communities, and more. And just whatever stories are representative of groups like this. Emily, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would say that if you're meaning by an environmental component, if you were meaning in relationship to like stewardship and climate change, your project does not need to be focused in that realm, but it does have to have a connection to land or an outdoor space.
Sorry, I'm just looking through the questions, see if there's any more similar ones. All right, so moving on to some questions about jurisdiction. Can the project span the US and Mexican border around the Tijuana River watershed?
Can you repeat that question? Sorry.
Yeah. Can the project span the US and Mexican border around the Tijuana River watershed?
Yeah, I think that's applicable just as long as it's not in the Mexico side. That's being California.
And then if we are planning to do a QR situation, what would we put for the map section?
You could include where you would plan to put the QR code for people to interact with. So maybe an approximate dot on a park map of where you would post the QR code for people to go look at.
So we do have questions about working with Indigenous nations. So working with Indigenous or collaborating with Indigenous nations can be a slow diplomatic process that might take more than a few months. So must all the terms of a partnership with an Indigenous nation be ironed out by the time the application is due? Or is it enough for the application to demonstrate that this outreach has begun and is still being figured out?
Yeah, I think that works. And, that is a really good point. It doesn't have to be fully ironed out, but if we encourage you to show proof that you're working to get the information ironed out by maybe getting a support letter from the landowner or just sending us a confirmation that from the partners that you're working with that it's being worked out.
And we live in and tell stories about Black liberation in West Oakland. Our outdoor environment is now urbanized. Are our stories eligible for this program, or must they only be in currently wild, quote unquote, wild spaces?
From my perspective, I considered urban areas wild in their own way. But I know what you mean in terms of like state parks and really just wide range of open space. And urban areas are a different type of area, but they're still, we would still consider them within our jurisdiction because there is different types of connections that folks can create to the outdoors in urban areas. So yes.
If the proposed project is located on a public park, is a permit required before pre-proposal, or can it be after grant approval?
It can be after grant approval. And in your project schedule, you could include a milestone of acquiring your permits. So we're not expecting the permits to be in place before you get the grant. It could be part of the grant's work to get the permit as well.
And another question, if we have many years long lease on national park land, are we the landowner if we are talking about programming on our space?
Yes.
Yeah, as long as you have the authority to make modifications, add signs or installations, then we consider you the landowner.
So regarding the projects themselves, Can the storytelling project be purely digital, like a film or website, or online, or does it need to have a physical implementation?
If you do want to do a project that's purely digital, you would have to demonstrate that it has a reach to the wider public. So if you're just posting it, that might not be enough, but if you're posting it and have a plan for how this will actually reach the intended audience, that could work. And we might suggest that you contact us to consult on a project like that, because it is not as cut and dry as having a tangible installation. Basically, the idea behind that is we want to reach the public. We want the stories to be widely shared and to change the culture of the outdoors a bit. We just really want to make sure that these dollars are going towards something that the public will see and benefit from.
And are construction funds for signage or signage upgrade a fundable cost?
Yes.
Erica, do you see any more new questions coming in?
Yes, we do. 1 second. We go to, oh, actually, no, I think we reached the bottom of it. Yeah,
I see a couple questions that
in the
maybe,
chat.
yeah.
Let me switch over.
I see a couple of questions too. One is, are storytelling performances eligible?
Yeah, I think that we can make those eligible, just as long as you elaborate on the intended audience and how you would reach this audience in a broad way. There's another question about if this is a reimbursable grant. Charlene, do you want to answer that?
Yes. The way that state agencies work for grants is that the grantees spend money out of their own pockets and then we reimburse them. And invoices can be submitted every month to every quarter. So you will have to be out the money for a short amount of time until we reimburse you.
So one of the attendings says, I'm looking at this grant for a mural installation to talk to the community about the importance of our earth. Did you mention where locations of these need to be?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I can take the question. So I think the person's asking if we have a designated location for projects in specific to mural installations, and the answer is no. We suggest that you work with the community so that you can find that location with the community that you're working with and where they would like to see this mural be placed.
I see one question here. Can we collaborate or partner up with Indigenous tribes that are not federally recognized as long as we have access to land by other means? Many Indigenous tribes who used to have reservations were deprived of that land by the government in the post-war period.
Yes, you definitely can. We encourage it. As long as somebody is either a federally recognized tribe or public agency or 501c3 nonprofit, your partners don't all have to be, just one of the partners must be, so that we can transfer funds to them.
I also want to say that we will add all these questions. We will write an FAQ for all these questions being asked today and answer them in a document so that you guys can refer back to it. And if your question does not get answered today, feel free to reach out to us and we can work with you, or we'll answer them in the FAQ if it's a broad question that benefits everyone. One of the questions I see is if someone applies for a full project cost, will they be able to get a lower amount if it's decided that this grant shouldn't or can't cover full costs? I guess they're asking if we will be awarding partial funds.
Yeah, I think it's a possibility. It will depend on how many asks we get and how much funding we have to meet them. So in a case where we get a lot of asks and not enough funds to meet them, we might give partial awards.
One of the potential applicants asked, can stories have a historical focus that isn't aimed at our outdoor activities, but that documents activities that took place in a waterfront industrial site?
Yeah, all kinds of stories are welcome as long as they are related to a publicly accessible outdoor space. And in urban environments, like Emily touched on, if it's like a public park or just a public access way or trail, urban trail, that kind of space is also acceptable. It doesn't have to be like what you think of as wilderness. I see a question. Can one organization submit multiple proposals? If we're seeking funding for 2 distinct projects, should they be submitted as 2 separate proposals? Should they be combined into one, or is this discouraged? And my answer is, if that's the case, I would recommend you reach out to us separately. It might make sense to do them separate, or it might make sense to do them together. So just talk to us about a situation like that.
Does the one question I see is, does any application have to include all 4 categories that are listed on the Jamboard? I can answer that. And the answer is no. We are mostly encouraging landowners and a community storyteller or a CBO to partner up so that the story gets told from the community perspective. And the landowner also is needed so that we can, if you have a tangible project that needs installation, the landowner is needed to help authorize that installation.
That kind of leads to this one question that I see. Again, it goes back to like the type of project, whether it's sort of physical signage or if it's more media related. So does the project need to have a physical location, or can it be a product like a book or video? And if it's the latter, book or video, how do you address that on the map requirement? So how would you put like the location on the cover page?
Well, if it's a book or video about a certain place, you can just include a map of the greater area. If it is something that really doesn't have a map that you can associate with it, like if it's a larger thing or statewide thing, you can ask us on a case-by-case basis, and maybe we can waive that requirement.
What about like ongoing newsletters or blogs that feature community stories from BIPOC? Like, are those eligible?
Although that sounds awesome, it would not be eligible for this grant program because it needs to have a relationship with an outdoor space.
So one of the question is, I still don't understand what land ownership means. Is there going to be a glossary for the terms used during this webinar? And yes, we can clarify what we mean. So a landowner would be, to us, would be someone like state parks. The county owns some of the beach sides. Sometimes is cities or special districts. and sometimes they're privately owned. So that is what we mean by landowners. And in our FAQ, we can definitely elaborate on some of the grant terms that we use, because we do know that sometimes we know what they mean, but are not directly, do not directly translate sometimes. So sorry about that.
And one question, how do we go about getting landowner permission for storytelling projects planned on public spaces like a state beach?
So you can reach out to the landowner. If you're having trouble making contact with them, that's something that we may be able to help with. The Conservancy has worked with many of the landowners around the state. So if we have an existing relationship, or even if we don't, we can try to help you get connected. But to demonstrate permission, in case you're asking about that, at the point, if you're invited to submit a full proposal, at the time of submitting that full proposal, you'll need to have a support letter written by the landowner that says they're on board with this project happening.
So somebody had a question about what is allowable, what is an allowable indirect cost under this grant, and what can they use the indirect funds cost for? So I'll go ahead and answer it. The Conservancy has a limit overhead cost of 15%. Overhead and indirect mean the same to us. And they can be used for rent, computers, telephone, office supplies, internet concert copy machine. However, you cannot use it for fundraising, lobbying, or entertainment. Any cost that is billed may not be any direct cost that is billed to us may not be included in overhead. We also have a general budget guidelines for our nonprofits that go over a lot of these terms. So if that is needed, we can send you the document as well. I'll just link it in the chat.
And that 15% that Emily mentioned is 15% of your total grant ask from us. Somebody asked to repeat what we said about the priority due date. On January 31st, 2022 at 5 p.m., that's our priority due date, our main deadline. And applications that are like pre-proposals that are submitted by then, we'll review all of those as one batch and invite full proposals. And then after that, we will still accept other proposals, but the earlier ones that are submitted will have priority in review. So they will get reviewed first.
I don't really see any new questions. Does anyone see new questions?
Go ahead, Erica.
Sorry, I just wanted to check, did we answer the question about the Jamboard? What's the difference between a storytelling org and community-based org?
There may or may not be a difference, I would say. What we were thinking is that some organizations are specifically dedicated to storytelling, while CBOs may have many stories to tell, but they might have a different primary purpose. So you can, if you don't fit clearly into one category, you can put your sticky note right in the middle, or just write in the note that you are both.
There's also community leaders that I would consider storytellers.
I wanted to ask this question just as like clarification and repeating in case there's any confusion. So the person is asking is they're going to apply for the Explore the Coast grant, which is a different grant program. So can one applicant organization feasibly receive both grants next year?
Yes, you can. Feel free to apply to both.
Are we seeing any more questions?
Mm,
No, I don't see any new ones. Sorry, I'm checking the chat real quick too. Yeah.
that was a lot of questions. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I think we're going to close out our webinar, and we will be sending you an email with the webinar link, the Jamboard link, and also an FAQ sheet that answers all the questions that we went over today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you all.